Tonight, I've got a story for you that still hurts to tell. Out where the desert doesn't forgive, and the sky burns red at both ends, a lonely cattle spread sat right on the knife edge between two lives that should have never met. It started with one act of mercy, a hand reaching through flames when every instinct said, "Run." One small, dangerous kindness that quietly unraveled years of guilt, silence, and something neither man was ready to name. Before we go any deeper, if this kind of story speaks to you, drop a like and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from today. The desert never showed mercy to Quade Varn. Long before that one terrible night, he already knew its harsh ways. How the sun could boil a man down to dry bones and blowing dust. How the endless quiet could devour a scream and leave no trace. But in all his 30 hard years, nothing had readied him for the roaring hell that exploded under those blood-red cliffs. The night the world turned upside down. He told himself he was hunting stolen steers. That was the story he clung to. Truth was, Quade was chasing shadows and bad memories. Pa Varn's ranch was bleeding money faster than they could string new wire. So he'd saddled up alone, riding into country that hated white men, half out of desperation, half out of pure, stubborn pride. He figured he could run off a few rustlers and come home with something worth keeping. Instead, he rode straight into a killing ground. The stink of smoke hit him first, sharp, sour, laced with the copper bite of fresh blood. When he topped the ridge, the whole valley burned orange. An Apache camp was going up in flames, canvas snapping and popping like dry kindling. Shadows darted everywhere. Men, women, horses shrieking in panic. His rifle came up on pure reflex. He'd seen enough death to last 10 lifetimes and hated every second of it. Then he spotted the warrior. Half buried in the dirt, chest painted with blood, a lance driven clean through his shoulder and into the earth. Couldn't have been more than 25. Firelight danced across a face carved from stone, proud, fierce, but knotted tight with pain. Quade should have turned his horse and ridden out. This wasn't his war. But when those dark eyes snapped open, steady, unblinking, full of fire, something inside him locked up. "Don't move," he said, not really expecting the man to understand. He dropped to one knee anyway, wrapped his hand around the spear shaft, and snapped it short just above the wound. The warrior never made a sound. He just stared, like he was burning Quade's face into his soul. The face of the crazy white man pulling him out of hell. "Why?" the Apache rasped, voice scraped raw. "Why help me, white man?" Quade paused, throat tight. "Hell if I know." He hauled the man upright, hooked one arm over his shoulder, and half-dragged, half-carried him away from the inferno. Arrows hissed past in the smoke. The night stank of death. Then a woman's scream sliced the air, high, desperate, and cut off like a knife. Quade jerked around just in time to see her drop. A slim shape in pale buckskin, struck by falling flame. Long black hair spilled across the sand like spilled ink. The warrior lunged, voice cracking. "Sable!" Quade clamped both arms around him. "She's gone! You can't help her now!" The man fought like a cornered mountain lion, nearly pulling Quade down into the dirt with him. But when his eyes locked on her body lying still in the firelight, all the fight poured out. He collapsed to his knees, a raw, shattered sound ripping from his chest. Quade didn't catch the words, but he knew grief when it clawed its way out. They reached a dry wash just before first light. Quade tore strips from his own shirt and bound the wound as tight as he could. "You'll pull through," he muttered. The warrior's eyelids fluttered. "You should have left me," he whispered. "Now we both carry her death." Quade looked away. Those words landed like a gut punch. He wanted to argue, to shove the guilt back down, but it stuck in his throat like ash. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. Wide open eyes. Perfect stillness. The faint smell of scorched sage drifting on the wind. By morning, the Apache was gone. Quade woke to an empty riverbed, his canteen missing, and one word scratched deep into the sand beside him. Zevor. He rode home without speaking. The desert stretched on forever, empty and cold. He never told a living soul what happened. Not the fire, not the woman, not the man he'd dragged out of the flames. On nights when the wind banged the shutters, he swore he heard her scream again. Or maybe it was Zevor's voice, low and bitter, cursing him through the dark. Quade Varn buried that night so deep it became part of him, a wound that never closed. But the desert remembers, and so did Zevor. Early spring came with a sharp edge off the high peaks. New grass was just beginning to fight through the dust. Quade was repairing fence on the north ridge, alone, like always, when his horse blew soft and uneasy. He figured it was a drifter hunting work, or maybe a rustler sniffing around the herd. Then the rider drew closer, and the hair on Quade's neck stood straight up. The man sat easy in the saddle, back straight, dark hair bound with a strip of rawhide. Under him was a painted Mustang, wild-eyed and hard-mouthed, the kind only an Apache could handle. Quade set his hammer down slow. His heart kicked once, hard. The stranger stopped 20 yards out, swung down, and let the silence hang between them, broken only by the low moan of wind in the grass. "Varn," the man said at last. Voice low, smooth, dangerous as a drawn blade. "You remember me?" Quade's mouth went dry. He remembered every damn thing, every mark on that warrior's face, every deep line etched by relentless sun and old sorrow, had haunted Quade's mind for years. It was Zevor, the man he'd dragged from the flames, the ghost he'd spent half a decade trying to bury. "What the hell are you doing here?" Quade asked, fingers twitching close to the Winchester leaning against the fence post. Zevor's black eyes flicked to the rifle, then locked back on Quade's face. "If I rode here to kill you, you'd never have seen my dust." And Quade stayed rooted. "Then spit it out. What do you want?" Zevor closed the gap a few slow steps, boots silent in the powder dirt. "To settle a debt," Quade scowled. "I ain't looking for payback." "It ain't your call," Zevor said. His voice dropped, softer now, but carrying a stubborn current underneath that set Quade's nerves on edge. "That night you took a lance that was aimed straight for my heart. You hauled me out of the fire. You handed me a life I never asked for. Every damn day since I've carried that weight like a millstone around my neck." Quade turned, yanking the barbed wire tighter than it needed to be. "You don't owe me 1 red cent." Zevor's tone cut sharper. "You only say that because you've blocked out her scream." Quade went rigid. The memory slammed into him like a sledgehammer. The woman in pale buckskin, the roar of flames, then nothing but silence. His fingers clamped the fence rail until the wood groaned and his knuckles bleached white. "I remember," he said, voice low. "Then you know why I'm standing here," Zevor answered. Quade swung around slow, meeting those fierce, unblinking eyes. "You came to lay the blame at my feet." A ghost of something, not quite a smile, not quite rage, touched Zevor's mouth. "I came to find out if you're still a man, if that fire carved the same hollow in your chest that it left in mine." The words dropped heavy between them, thick as smoke. Quade wanted to order him off the land, wanted to shove the whole cursed night back into the dark where it belonged. But there was something in the way Zevor stood. Calm, steady, the morning sun catching the wind in his dark hair, that made turning away impossible. "Pitch your camp on the south ridge if you have to," Quade muttered. "But don't plant roots. Folks around these parts don't cotton to Apaches hanging close." Zevor studied him, head cocked just a fraction. "And you? You got any use for me?" Quade held his stare, heart thudding uneven. "I don't take kindly to ghosts." For a long beat, Zevor said nothing. Then, soft as the breeze sliding through the grass, he murmured, "Maybe that's all either of us is anymore." He swung up on the painted Mustang and rode toward the low hills, leaving Quade at the fence with his pulse hammering and his hands trembling from a feeling he couldn't put a name to. That night, long after the stars came out, Quade thought he heard hoofbeats outside the cabin. He yanked the door open. Nothing. Just one Apache arrow driven deep into the dirt by the porch steps. Not a warning. A promise. He ain't leaving. And for the first time in years, Quade realized he didn't want him to. 3 days dragged by, and Quade still hadn't breathed a word to anyone about the Apache camped on his south ridge. Zevor's presence lay over the ranch like a thunderhead. Quiet. Heavy. Dangerous. The hands felt it. The horses felt it, shying at every rustle of wind. By the 4th morning, the bunkhouse was buzzing. Word had leaked that Quade had been seen jawing with a redskin. The talk spread faster than grass fire. Down at the saloon in town, the talk turned meaner. One rancher leaned on the bar and growled, "Varn's lost his damn mind. Sheltering savages now." Quade pretended not to hear. He kept telling himself Zevor would ride out soon. But that evening, when he swung by to check the fence line, there the warrior sat, cross-legged beside a small blaze, whetstone sliding slow along his knife blade. "You're still here," Quade said, stepping down from the saddle. Zevor didn't lift his eyes. "You told me I could stay the night on the ridge. Not forever." "I never said forever." The words came calm, but that same iron thread of defiance ran underneath. Quiet strength that made a man uneasy and curious in equal measure. "You never did like things you couldn't figure out, Varn," Zevor said. "You still don't." Quade crossed his arms. "And you think you've got me pegged?" Zevor finally looked up. Firelight gleamed in those dark eyes. "I know why you never turn your head south. I know you don't sleep when the canyon wind howls. I know she still walks through your dreams." Quade's jaw locked tight. "Enough." "I can't stop," Zevor said, voice dropping soft. "Because I see her too." The words hung there, alive, crackling with a tension that made Quade's blood pound in his ears. A log snapped in the fire, and sparks shot into the night like tiny stars. He wanted to demand answers, to shove back against whatever this was. But Zevor's steady gaze pinned him, unwavering, relentless, almost gentle. At last, Quade forced the words out. "You came back to torment me?" "No," Zevor murmured. "To honor her memory the right way," Zevor finished, voice low and steady. Quade stared at him, words stuck somewhere between his throat and his gut. He couldn't figure this man out, one who carried both wildfire and heartbreak in the same breath, who held sorrow like it was something holy. That night when Quade rode back to the cabin, 2 of his hands were waiting on the porch steps. Caelth and Drave, solid workers, but mouths that ran quicker than a stampede. "Boss?" Caelth started, voice strung tight. "You know there's an Apache camped out on your south ridge?" Quade didn't blink. "I know." "Then why the hell ain't you run him off?" Drave cut in. Folks in town are already jawing. They say you've gone soft, or loco. Drave spat a dark stream into the dirt. You start feeding that buck, you'll have a whole war party showing up. No end to it. Quade's temper frayed. You boys fretting over your wages or my fences? Neither answered. Their eyes said plenty. Fear and old hate ran deeper than any paycheck. Come first light, they were gone. A short note lay on the kitchen table next to their last week's pay. Quade glanced at it once, then fed it to the stove flames. Later that morning when he rode out, Zevor was waiting again near the fence line. You lost 2 men, he said plainly. Quade gave a short nod. Folks don't trust what they can't wrap their heads around. Zevor tilted his head. And you? Can you? Quade tugged his hat off, let out a long breath. I don't know what to trust these days. The Apache stood, closing the distance until only the split-rail fence stood between them. He pressed one palm flat against the weathered wood. Then trust this, he said quietly. I didn't come to take anything from you. I came because that night won't leave me alone. Because you won't leave me alone. Quade's breath snagged hard in his chest. The words struck deeper than he was ready for. He looked at Zevor. This man he'd once hauled out of burning chaos. This stranger who knew every secret Quade had buried. And something twisted inside him. Not fear, not rage. Something raw and unnamed he couldn't face. Zevor gave a small nod, like he understood the silence, then turned and walked back toward the ridge. The sun sank low behind the peaks, stretching their shadows long and black across the flats. Quade stayed at the fence long after Zevor vanished into the haze. Those words kept echoing in his skull. I can't stop thinking about you. He tried to tell himself it was only guilt, only old ghosts. But down in the marrow, he knew better. The past wasn't chasing him anymore. It was beckoning. On the 4th night since Zevor's return, Quade gave up pretending sleep would come. The air felt thick, the quiet too loud. The memory of Zevor's eyes in the fireglow, dark, unflinching, speaking truths no man should voice, wouldn't let him rest. He poured a shot of whiskey. It burned his throat but did nothing for the fire already smoldering under his ribs. That wasn't liquor. That was memory. Outside, the desert wind moaned low and lonesome through the eaves. Quade stood at the window, watching moonlight turn the horizon silver. He never heard the door until it groaned open behind him. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly, not turning. Zevor's voice drifted from the shadows, soft. You never told me to leave. Quade turned. The Apache stood just inside the threshold, hat in hand. Dust powdered his boots. His face was unreadable in the dim light, but the hearth fire played across it, catching the thin scar near his temple, the one Quade remembered from the glow of burning lodges. What do you want, Zevor? Quade asked. Those dark eyes held steady. You said you remember her. I want to know how. Quade set the glass down hard enough to slosh whiskey over the rim. You really think I could forget? Zevor took one slow step forward. Then tell me. Quade's jaw worked. In all those years, he'd never spoken the night aloud. Not once. But now, with Zevor standing there, waiting with that quiet, patient force, the words clawed their way out. She ran toward the flames, he said, voice rough. Everybody else was scattering, but she went back in. I saw her stumble over a kid. She scooped the little one up, threw him clear of the fire. He shut his eyes. The picture was still razor sharp. I tried to get to her. Swear to God I did. But by the time I fought through the smoke, the whole tent caved in. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed on Zevor's face. The usual hard edge was gone. What was left was older, quieter. Grief worn smooth by time. Her name was Sable, Zevor said softly. My promised one. She wasn't born for war. She wanted peace. She believed one day whites and Apaches could walk under the same sky without spilling blood. Quade's throat closed tight. And I let that dream burn to nothing. Zevor stepped closer until the sharp scent of sagebrush and wood smoke hung thick between them. No, he said firmly. You didn't kill her. The fire did. The fear did. The lies we've all been fed did. He paused, then pressed 2 fingers lightly to his own chest. But yeah, I hated you for years. Long years. Until one day I realized that when I shut my eyes, it wasn't her face I saw burning. It was you, reaching through the flames, dragging me clear. Quade stared, breath snared somewhere between shock and a dangerous kind of recognition. Why lay all this on me now? Because I've carried both your face and hers inside me too damn long, Zevor answered, and I still don't know which one cuts deeper. Silence swallowed the room. Only the wind sighed through the gaps in the log walls. Quade turned away, fingers clamping the table edge until the wood creaked and his knuckles stood bone-white. You talk like I'm already dead. Zevor's mouth curved. Just a faint, sorrowful tilt. Aren't we both? The words drifted and hung. Neither man moved. The hearth fire snapped, spitting a quick burst of sparks into the dim. At last, Quade let out a long, ragged breath. I can't undo what happened. I know, Zevor said quietly. But maybe we can decide what comes after. He eased another step nearer until barely a hand's width separated them. His voice fell to a rough whisper. You keep her locked away in your head, Varn. But it ain't her memory that's eating you alive. It's what you felt the first time our eyes locked in that firelight. Quade's heart lurched hard against his ribs. He couldn't move, couldn't pull air. The raw honesty in Zevor's gaze was too much, too bright, too real. Then Zevor turned, boots scuffing softly toward the open door. Come first light I ride out, he said over his shoulder. But you'll see me again. The door closed with a gentle thud. Quade stood frozen, eyes locked on the fading coals. His pulse still thrummed with the echo of those last words. You'll see me again. He didn't know whether to pray the promise held true, or dread that it would. Morning light poured gold across the open range, turning Quade Varn's ranch into something almost beautiful, almost a prison. He stood on the porch boards, gaze fixed on the far horizon, wondering if Zevor would keep his word. A full week had slipped by since that night in the cabin, and the place felt emptier than it should. Too still. Zevor's absence had carved out a hollow spot under Quade's ribs he hadn't seen coming. Then a thin ribbon of dust rose along the ridge. Quade's chest squeezed. His hand dropped automatically to the rifle stock. But the instant he recognized the painted Mustang, the tension bled out of his fingers. Zevor rode straight into the yard with that effortless belonging to the land. But he wasn't riding alone. A handful of Apache warriors trailed him, wary, silent, eyes sweeping the skyline like hunting hawks. The few hands Quade still had stepped forward, uneasy. Quade lifted a palm. Easy. Zevor swung down, sunlight carving the hard planes of his face. They need a place to hole up, he said plain, and I need your help. Quade frowned. My help? Yeah, Zevor said. Your people are hunting them down. Quade's gut dropped. He'd convinced himself the past could stay buried, that his fenced-off life would stay quiet. But here it was. clawing its way back up. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Settlers," Zevor answered. "They're scared of us. Scared of the truth even more. I can't hold them off by myself." Quade swallowed. Throwing in with Zevor meant opening the door to real trouble. But he also knew the warrior had once pulled him from his own private hell. And deeper down, something else tugged at him. A steady, growing draw toward the man who carried both fire and memory in those dark eyes. "All right," Quade said at last. "We'll help, but not because I trust your boys. Because I owe you." Zevor's gaze softened. Just a fraction. "You don't owe me anything, Varn. You gave me back my life. Now I'm asking for your nerve to help save a few more." The next hours blurred into motion. Quade worked alongside them to strengthen a natural box canyon the warriors had chosen for defense, stacking rocks, dragging deadfall, checking sight lines. He rode with them through tight passes, moving low and quiet, scanning every rim and draw for trouble. With each mile, the old guilt tangled with a sharp, unfamiliar thrill. For the first time in years, the desert didn't feel like a grave. It felt like ground worth standing on. When darkness settled, the group gathered around a low fire. Flames danced across Zevor's face as he moved with that calm certainty, giving orders with nothing more than a tilt of his head or a quick gesture. He caught Quade watching. "You could ride out," Zevor said softly. "Head home. Act like none of this touches you." Quade shook his head. "Not this time. I'm staying." He met Zevor's eyes across the fire. "You pulled me out once." Zevor waited, silent. "Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn to square things," Quade said, voice rough but sure. Zevor's mouth curved, just the barest hint of a smile, almost shy under the firelight. "Then we're square. Maybe more than square." Quade looked straight at him. Heat climbed through his chest, fierce and undeniable now. The same blaze that had tormented him across all those empty desert years. The same heat that had seared him in every nightmare. Only this time it wasn't memory. It was alive in the man sitting across the flames. Hours later, when the camp finally settled into a restless hush, Zevor spoke again. His voice came low, close, meant for Quade alone. "I can't get you out of my head." Quade went still. The words landed harder than any slug from a Winchester. He'd dreamed them in fevered, guilt-soaked nights, but hearing them spoken plain made his blood roar. He lifted his eyes to meet Zevor's. The warrior's gaze was steady, unguarded, impossibly near. Quade swallowed against the sudden knot in his throat, every old regret and every buried ache pressing down on him. "I don't know what to say to that," he admitted, voice cracking. "Then don't say anything," Zevor whispered. "Just hold on to it. That's enough." The fire snapped and hissed between them, sending bright sparks spiraling up into the black. For the first time since that blood-red night years ago, Quade felt the walls between them crumble, not from fear, not from shame, not from silence. Something stronger had taken their place, something that felt like a promise carved straight into the heart. The canyon ridges had a way of eating sound, leaving only the soft scrape of wind through mesquite and the far-off yip of a coyote. Quade had spent years running from silence, terrified of what it dragged up from the deep. But with Zevor near, the quiet didn't choke him anymore. It hummed. Alive. Electric. They'd just finished shoring up a small lookout post at the mouth of a tight ravine. Quade dragged a sleeve across his sweat-soaked brow, feeling the deep ache in muscles that hadn't worked this hard in years. Zevor came up quiet, as a shadow, and nodded toward the low blaze. Sit, he said, voice hushed, almost tender. We've got a few hours before they might try something. Quade dropped down, bone-tired. The firelight played long, wavering shadows across Zevor's face, sharpening the cut of his jaw, deepening the midnight pools of his eyes. In that glow, he looked different from the harsh daylight version, less like stone, more like flesh and blood. Yet the same fierce spark Quade had carried in his head for years still burned there. You've changed, Zevor said quietly. You wear your guilt like chainmail, but it don't shield you. Quade stared into the flames. Some hurts ain't built to mend. Zevor eased down across from him. The space between them felt charged, humming with unseen current. Maybe not, he murmured, voice so low it barely carried. But some wounds need to be carried together. Quade's pulse kicked up hard. He wanted to argue, to fall back into the old armor, but Zevor's nearness made running impossible. There was something unbreakable in him, patience mixed with iron will, strength wrapped in quiet closeness that pulled Quade in against every instinct to bolt. The Apache leaned forward just a fraction, eyes locked. I think about you, Varn. Always. Every time I shut my eyes, it's your face I see. That night I've walked through it 1,000 times, and it ain't just the fire, it's you, reaching in, hauling me out, giving me air when I thought I'd choke on smoke. Quade's hands fisted in his lap. The words carried years of unspoken weight. He swallowed, throat tight. You shouldn't think of me that way, he faltered, lost for how to finish. Zevor's gaze softened, but his voice stayed firm. I can't stop thinking about you, Quade. You don't get to hide no more, not from me and not from yourself. Quade's breath caught sharp. He'd felt this moment in his darkest dreams, sensed the pull on lonely nights, but facing it head-on shattered every defense he'd built. A night breeze stirred, lifting sparks from the fire and scattering them into the dark. Quade swallowed again. And what if it's dangerous? He whispered. What if letting it happen changes everything? Zevor's faint smile returned as he leaned closer. Then we meet it head-on, together. Firelight washed over his face, making him look both solid and untouchable all at once. Quade felt heat surge through him, desire, fear, longing crashing together until he felt raw, stripped bare. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The canyon seemed to hold its breath right along with them. Then, slow and deliberate, Zevor reached out. His fingers brushed the back of Quade's hand. Just a fleeting touch, but it carried more weight than any vow. A spark jumped through Quade's veins, sharp and alive. You ain't alone, Zevor murmured. Not tonight. Not ever again. Quade let out a long, trembling breath, years of tension bleeding away into the dark. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The fire, the wind, and that small, deliberate touch spoke louder than anything he could have said. As the night grew thicker and the shadows stretched long across the canyon floor, the two men sat wordless, tied together by truths they'd never spoken aloud, by a longing neither could quite name, and by a shared scar that had somehow pulled them through impossible darkness to this moment. For the first time since that night of roaring flames, Quade Varn felt something he'd forgotten he could feel. Hope. Hope that maybe some wounds could scar over clean. Hope that bonds forged in tragedy might actually hold. Hope that the quiet words exchanged in the dark could carry more than old pain. They could carry the faint promise of something real, something worth fighting for. Quade had grown accustomed to the lonely hush of his ranch, the steady grind of daily work, the desert wind his only steady company. But Zevor's presence had changed the air itself. It brought life back into the place, along with a sharp edge of tension and feelings Quade had buried deep for years. The Apache stayed near now, working the herd, riding the high ridges on patrol, earning grudging respect from the handful of hands who hadn't yet quit. But down in town, folks weren't happy. Rumors raced like dry grass catching spark. "Varn's hiding an Apache," they hissed in the saloons and along the dusty boardwalks. Dangerous. Reckless. Old fear curdled into fresh anger. Decades of bad blood sharpened the hate. One afternoon, Quade rode into town for supplies. Every head turned. Eyes followed him like he carried plague. Sheriff Torque, a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache, touched the brim of his hat in greeting, but his stare held steel. "Word gets around quick, Varn," he said, leaning against the post office doorframe. "They say you've got an Apache roaming free on your spread. People are nervous." Quade's jaw clenched. "He's no danger to anyone. He saved my life once." Torque let out a slow breath. "Maybe he did. But the town don't owe him a damn thing. If he sticks around, trouble's coming. You'd best pick a side before blood gets spilled." Quade left town with the same cold knot in his gut that had been there since Zevor rode back into his life. When he got home, Zevor was waiting at the fence line. Wind played through his dark hair. The painted Mustang shifted, restless under him. "They're mad," Quade said quietly. "They don't understand," Zevor answered. "They never have." Zevor's eyes darkened, but his voice stayed level. "Then we prove we're not the enemy." Quade shook his head. "It ain't that easy. They see an Apache, they see a threat, that's all." "We'll do what we have to," Zevor said. "I don't fear them, and I don't fear you. But if they ride up here, you'd better be ready to stand tall." Days dragged on, and the anger in town boiled higher. Men loitered outside the saloon, muttering about traitors and redskins squatting on Varn land. At dusk one evening, a mob finally came, torches flickering, voices thick with rage, riding straight for the ranch. Quade felt his chest lock tight. His hand dropped toward his belt, then stopped. He didn't need iron. Not yet. Zevor appeared at his side, silent, steady as stone. He studied the approaching riders like a wolf sizing up a pack of dogs. "You will not set foot on this ground," Zevor said, voice low, lethal, perfectly controlled. "Or you answer to me." The mob hesitated. Their bluster cracked under the weight of his calm certainty. But hate dies hard. A few voices shouted challenges, daring him to ride out. Quade stepped forward, planting himself between Zevor and the crowd. "This man saved my life once," he called, voice carrying clear across the open flat. "I stand with him. You touch him, you touch me, and I won't forget it." A heavy quiet fell. Threats grumbled low, but Quade's stand, backed by Zevor's unyielding presence, forced them to waver. The mob didn't break apart completely, but it splintered, riders turning back into the dusk. Later that night, Quade stood on the porch, watching stars prick through the black above the ridge. Zevor stepped up beside him without a sound. His hand slid into Quade's for a brief moment, then slipped away. "They tested you," he said softly. Quade let out a long breath, tension easing from his shoulders. "We barely held the line." Zevor's gaze warmed. "Doesn't matter. What matters is we're still here, side by side." The desert wind moved around them, carrying both victory and a fragile peace. Quade understood then, standing up for Zevor, for the man who lived in his memories and now in his heart, wasn't just bravery. It was truth. For the first time in years, he felt the power of choosing his own path, free of shame or fear. And Zevor, steady, unbreakable, stayed right there with him. The town could rage. Quade knew one thing for certain. He'd never turn his back on the man who'd become far more than a shadow. Dawn was just breaking over the eastern ridge when the first angry shouts rolled across Quade Varn's ranch. Thin smoke drifted up from the town below. Quade's heart hammered, not with terror, but with a fierce protective fire. He'd always known this reckoning might come. The settlers wouldn't tolerate Zevor and his people staying on Varn land unchallenged. "They're coming," Quade muttered, swinging up into the saddle. His gaze cut to the far ridge where Zevor already waited. The painted Mustang pawed the dirt, muscles bunched tight like wound springs. Zevor's face stayed calm, impossible to read, but the hard line of his jaw and the set of his shoulders screamed he was ready for whatever hell broke loose. Quade's crew had mostly scattered. Only the two of them left now. And somehow, that felt like plenty. The first riders appeared as black silhouettes against the climbing sun, about 20 strong. Some cradled rifles, others gripped pitchforks and torches. Fear, rage, and blind hate drove them forward. Quade's fingers tightened on the reins. "Hold steady," he said. Zevor gave no reply, his eyes locked on the advancing line. Then, with a short, sharp whistle, he gave the signal. Horses exploded into motion, kicking up thick clouds of dust. Quade followed on instinct, the old rhythm of riding flowing through his arms and legs. But everything felt different now, every hoofbeat pounding in time with his racing heart. The settlers split, trying to flank them from both sides. But Zevor knew this land like the lines on his own palm. He led Quade through tight slots and secret draws with eerie precision, every turn deliberate, every move keeping the pursuers just out of reach. Quade stole a glance at him as they ducked behind a boulder pile. Zevor's eyes burned fierce and clear. "We don't leave anybody behind," he said, voice low and rock solid. "Not you. Not me." They pushed deeper into the maze of canyons, walls closing in, dust choking the morning air. The thunder of pursuit faded, but never vanished completely. Quade's blood sang, not just with fear, but with the sharp thrill of being alive, of moving with purpose in a world that demanded guts, clear eyes, and raw instinct. Then gunfire cracked from above. Quade ducked low, a slug buzzed hot past his ear. Zevor's hand clamped onto his shoulder like a vice. "Go!" he barked. They plunged into a narrow side ravine where the rock walls shot straight up. The attackers slowed, horses skittering and panicking in the tight squeeze. In that moment, Quade understood the true depth of Zevor's skill, not just surviving, but knowing exactly how to shield life itself. Hours blurred together as they threaded the stone labyrinth. No water, no rest. Sun beating down merciless. Quade's arms burned. Sweat stung his eyes, but he kept riding. Zevor beside him was both anchor and storm. Comforting, unsettling, a living reminder of every buried memory, every fear, every unspoken want Quade had tried to kill off. As twilight bled across the sky, they reached a small, hidden spring tucked between soaring cliffs. Quade slid from the saddle, legs shaking. Zevor dismounted smooth as ever, eyes sweeping the rimrock. The desert had gone quiet now, nothing but the soft drip of water and the sigh of wind. Quade dropped to the ground, chest heaving. "I thought we'd—" His voice broke. Zevor knelt close, planting a strong hand on Quade's shoulder. "Thought we'd get split up," he finished for him. "I don't leave. Not now. Not ever." Quade's chest squeezed tight. The words, the grip, the shared danger, they fused together. searing themselves into him forever. Zevor's eyes held his, steady, fierce, and unexpectedly gentle. And Quade finally admitted what he'd fought for years. He wasn't alone anymore. The desert rolled out ahead, vast, harsh, unforgiving. But with Zevor there, it felt like shelter. Quade realized then that some nights of fire, some losses carved deep, some old whispers weren't meant to break him. They were meant to bring him here, to this place, to this man. And for the first time in too many years, he believed they'd make it through together. Dawn cracked open over the canyon in a dull, bloody orange, pouring like molten copper across the broken cliffs. Quade had hardly slept, body stiff from the long chase, nerves raw, but his mind stayed sharp, every sense tuned to the smallest sound. They'd thought the worst of the settlers were behind them. Then a shadow moved on the high rim. A small knot of armed men had dogged them through the night, using the narrow canyons like a chute. Quade spotted them first. Rifles up, faces hard and set. Zevor's Mustang snorted, muscles tight, ready to bolt. The Apache flicked a glance at Quade, expression blank but commanding. "Stay tight," he whispered. "We finish this." Quade nodded, fingers curling around his rifle. His chest felt like iron, adrenaline, dread, and a strange new hope all tangled together. For years he'd carried nothing but guilt and silence. Today, he moved for something else. To protect Zevor, the man who'd lived in his head since that night of flames. The first shot cracked off the stone walls, and the canyon erupted. Quade ducked, returning fire when he could, but a bullet slammed into his shoulder. Pain exploded, white-hot, blinding, and he staggered, hitting the dirt. Zevor was there in an instant, hauling him up by the arm, steadying him. "No," Quade gasped. "I've got you," Zevor said, grip like forged iron. "They don't take you. Not today." They fought shoulder to shoulder, dust swirling with blood, sweat, and gunsmoke. Zevor moved like a blade, dodging, disarming, striking with the quiet, lethal rage of a man shaped by grief and unbreakable honor. Quade fought on, dazed and bleeding, but Zevor's unbreakable resolve kept him in the fight. One last desperate surge carried them to a thin ledge overhanging a roaring river. The pursuers, outflanked and frantic, faltered at the edge. The bullet wound in Quade's shoulder pulsed with every heartbeat, but he refused to drop. He felt Zevor lean in, pressing their foreheads together, dark eyes searching his in silent question. "Can you hold on?" Quade gave a faint nod, the connection between them solid as iron. "I never owed you anything," Zevor breathed against his ear, voice warm and low. "You were always mine to carry in my mind." Quade's sight swam with pain and something softer. Relief. The truth struck deeper than lead. Redemption had never been about settling scores in blood. It was about standing shoulder to shoulder, breathing through the same fire, staring the past down without flinching. Under Zevor's steady lead, they eased down the ledge, leaving the last of the hunters behind. Every step sent fresh agony through Quade's body, yet the shared weight of survival somehow lifted the old load crushing his chest. Protecting Zevor had finally let him protect himself, his pride, his memories, his right to feel alive again. At last they reached cover beneath a thick stand of mesquite. Quade sank to the earth, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. Zevor knelt close, pressing a cool, wet cloth to the wound. His hands moved with calm certainty. Every touch carried care, worry, and a quiet vow that promised more than just making it through the day. "You fought hard," Zevor said softly. "Not only for me, Quade. For yourself." Quade swallowed, voice rough and unsteady. "Couldn't have done it without you." "You did it," Zevor insisted, eyes locked on his. "You looked the past square in the face. You looked yourself in the face." For a long stretch, they sat without words. The river's thunder filled the canyon, sage and dust mixed with the faint tang of distant gun smoke. Quade let his shoulders drop, tension bleeding away. He was hurt, sure, but alive, and free in a way he hadn't been since boyhood. And Zevor stayed right there, steady, unshakable. The one constant no blaze, no posse, no desert gale could tear away. In a clarity he'd never known before, Quade saw it plain. That night of fire, the guilt, the long silence, they hadn't been sent to ruin him. They'd led him straight here, to redemption not paid in blood, but earned in loyalty, in trust, in the silent strength of two hearts beating close. The desert rolled out forever around them, but for the first time, Quade felt he could finally draw a full breath, and that he'd never ride alone again. Sunset spilled behind the western cliffs, washing the sky in deep purples and blazing oranges. For the first time in years, Quade felt a peace he hadn't known since before the flames. The fight was done. The threat pushed back for now. Zevor sat quiet beside him on the ridge, horses cropping grass nearby. Quade had locked away every word about that night for far too long. Pain, shame, and fear had kept his mouth shut tight. But with Zevor beside him, constant, relentless, the walls around his heart finally gave way. "I never talked about that night," Quade said softly, voice almost lost in the wind. "Not to a soul, not Pa, not the hands, not even to myself." Zevor's dark eyes caught the firelight and held his. "I know," he said quietly. "Neither did I. But we carry it anyway. Every single day." Quade swallowed hard. "I buried it deep, thinking it'd make me tougher, thinking if I forgot I could keep going. But I never really moved on." "You didn't have to say it," Zevor murmured. "I felt it, every night, every sunrise." Quade's pulse jumped. The confession felt dangerous, raw, stripping him bare. But Zevor didn't pull back. He just waited, patient and solid, letting Quade set down the years of weight like stones at his feet. "I remember it all," Quade went on, voice shaking. "The fire, her scream, your face in the flames, the way your eyes looked when I dragged you out. I thought I was saving you, but maybe I was the one who needed saving." Zevor reached over and brushed Quade's hand, gentle, yet firm, grounding. "We saved each other," he said. "You don't see it yet, but you carried me out of that night just like I carry you now." Quade's throat closed. He'd spent years hiding behind silence and distance, but under this wide desert sky, with old guilt and new survival tangled together, he understood something deep and true. He'd never really been alone. Not with Zevor's shadow living in his mind. Not with his presence filling the quiet corners of every day. Quade started, but the words snagged. Zevor's warm, steady hand held his, anchoring him. "You don't have to speak it," he whispered. "Just feel it. That's enough for me." Quade's chest rose and fell in deep, ragged breaths, years of silence cracking open with each one. At last he looked straight into Zevor's eyes, unflinching. I've spent so long trying not to remember, he admitted. But I can't, because you won't let me. Zevor's mouth curved into a small, almost shy smile, though his eyes stayed fierce. I won't forget, and I won't let you. The desert night folded around them, stars sharp as broken glass overhead, wind carrying sage, dust, and the faint smell of far-off fires. Quade saw it clear as day. The desert had shaped him, but Zevor had brought him back to life. They sat together in quiet, hands clasped, a deep understanding settling between them. The past still scarred them, raw and real, but it no longer ruled the moment. For the first time, Quade could breathe without guilt pressing down on his lungs. I can't stop thinking about you either, he whispered at last, voice low and honest. Zevor's fingers tightened. A promise, a reassurance. Then we're square, he said softly. More than square. From here on out, we face whatever comes. Together. Quade nodded, warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the man at his side. The night stretched long, calm, yet alive with possibility. The desert, hard, merciless, seemed to bend before the quiet truth between them. Two hearts, tied by fire, blood, and memory, could find salvation not just in staying alive, but in each other. And for the first time in years, Quade spoke freely. No fear, no hesitation. The man who'd worn silence like armor had found his voice at last. And the desert listened. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso Legal/Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.